Hi everyone, welcome back to Java 1 for All. And since we are getting pretty proficient with objects, references, methods, and parameters, we are going to do a small exercise to make sure that we are fixing this into our minds. So basically, we are going to create a class called employee with the following attributes: name, age, and salary. And as we can see here, 3 salaries should be stored. This means that probably this variable will be an array. And then we have to create 2 methods. One to print all the data from this class, employee, and another one to calculate and print the average salaries value. So let's get started. First, we are going to create here inside domain a class that will represent the employee. Now we are going to create 3 attributes: name, age, and an array of salaries. Okay, so the secret when you are developing software is to break the problem into small problems. So the first problem is to create this, and we fixed. And we are going to create now the second part of the problem, that is printing all the data from this class, actually this object. We can do that the same way we did before. We are going to create a method inside this class that will take care of getting the data from these attributes inside this object and printing into the console. We don't need a return for that, and we are going to call print. Since we are inside the object, when we execute this, we don't need to get any argument, or we don't have to define any parameter. And then salt, name, Control D, age, and salaries. Okay, so most of the problem is now solved, but we have to test. Let's go here to test, right click, new Java class, employee test 01. PSVM, we need a reference variable, employee, and we need an object, employee. Now, employee.name, Sanji, employee.age, 21, and then employee.salaries. And remember, reference variables for arrays, they need an object. So this is not primitive. If we try to send 1, we are going to get an error. We need to send an object. Arrays, they are always objects. So new double, let's say 987 90 2000, and then 1250 98. Okay, can we do it like this? No, we cannot do like this. Now that we have the object initialized, we are going to call employee dot print. Control Shift F10, and we have our first problem. So we had the impression that we were okay, but actually we have to fix the reference that we are getting in the console, because since this is a reference variable, we need to actually go over all the positions inside this array. And we are going to do that by creating a for loop. So for, and I will call the reference variable here salary, and I'm going to iterate over the salaries. And then I'm going to print this salary. But I don't want to print the salaries like stacked. I want to have the salaries like side by side. So I will just remove the ln. It will not jump line, but I will need to give a space, otherwise they will be packed together. So Shift F10. And now, as you can see, we have the salaries displayed in the console. So basically, we can consider the first part complete. Now, let's move on to the second one. So the second one, we have to create another method. So later on, when you get more proficient with like classes, objects, and you feel comfortable splitting without having trouble to understand where is your code, we could separate this even more, because we are putting the business logic inside employee. And as I said, this is not really good related to the cohesion. So we have the print is okay because it's just printing, but when we are doing some math, yeah, we are kind of having business logic inside this method, inside this object, and it's not a very good idea. But don't worry, we are going to get there at some point. Now, same thing, public void. Calculate and print average salary. I will create a variable here that will be the average, and since we are inside a method, we have the local scope, and local scope do not have the full initialization values, so we need to give 0 or any other value, but we need this double average initialized. Now the same thing, I will just copy this one because it's the same for, and I will do now the following. Average will get its value, and then I'm going to sum all the salary that I have inside my array, and at the end I will do the following. So average now will be the total, the average, divided by the number of salaries that I have inside. So salaries.length. So I'm summing up all three values, and then I'm dividing by 3. And now south, the average salary is plus average. Let's see, Shift F10, and of course we're not going to get anything because we didn't call. We could come back here and call employee dot calculate and print average salary. Control Shift F10, and now as you can see, they are in the same line. We can fix this by adding a \n and executing again Shift F10 without control because we are not in the test class. Then we do have our values. Okay, so technically the exercise is completed, but there are some things that we can do to improve, and there are some errors that we should be aware of. So first thing, we are calling this twice, and technically we are just printing. Why not call this inside the print method? So basically, after we print all the name, age, and salaries, why not just add a call to this calculate and print average salary? Doing this way, we can avoid calling twice the reference variable to call different methods that's basically doing the same thing. So now Control Shift F10, and as you can see, we have exactly the same result. So a little bit better. The responsibility for printing now it's inside the print, but then comes the part that all developers, they are afraid, the user. Now what happens if our system is running and suddenly they forget to send the salaries? Let's say I'm trying to print this report without any salaries. What's going to happen to our code? Shift F10. Oops. So as you can see, this is what we call a runtime exception. Runtime exceptions, they are most of the time the developer's fault. Why? Because there are several ways that we could prevent this from happening, or even taking care of it if it happens. In this case, no pointer exception is basically happening because we are trying to execute something that does not exist. So this is called stack trace, and it is your job as developer to just see and understand what this means. So right now we have a pretty small one, but trust me, you can have like stack traces with hundreds of lines, and you need to understand because this is the information that you need to fix the problem. And sometimes your program is running production and you don't have access to the code. You don't know what's happening. You only have access to this stack trace. So as a developer, you should be able to understand what's happening here. So basically, you should read from bottom up. You can see that it started here on line 12 when we called print, and then it went inside print. And on the employee.java line 11, we got our no pointer exception. Because remember, when we create variables, like class variables, attributes, we have default values, default initialization values. And for string is since a reference type null, for integer is 0, and arrays, since they are reference variables, they also have null. So basically null, when you try to execute something, you will get no pointer exception. Now we can fix this. How? Adding one if and checking if salaries is different than no. What I'm going to do, I will protect my code that's giving us the exception. And then we execute again. And if you're not careful, you will think, oh, I just fixed. But no, actually it's happening the same exception, but in a different place. So now it started on 12, and then it went to 16. That basically this line called another method, and then the other method, that is the one in the line 21, is giving the exception. So basically the same. We can do another if. So if salary is different than no. Now we have to be careful because we are calling salaries.length. And this, if it's no.length, what's the length of no? No pointer exception. So make sure that you are having the block covering both lines, the for and the average. Let's execute. And now we have the result. But we can improve this code a little bit, and that is something that I want to show you. Remember that I said when we were talking about ifs that if you have one line, you technically don't need the curly braces. And if I remove this code, it is going to work, even though they may not be fully formatted. If we execute, we get the same results. Because this, since is a block of code for Java, it's considered one line. So if I press Ctrl-Alt-L to format a code, you will see that it's now kind of under if. So IntelliJ is telling you, okay, this part, this block, it's part of the if. But since this can get pretty confusing, always add the curly braces. Okay. Another thing that you may think, now that the exercise is fully working, we could fix this part. We could move this one up. And then if we execute, technically this is what should be happening. You should not be printing average of something that does not exist. Well, there are a little bit of improvements we can do here. In my opinion, this is totally my opinion. As you can see, the if is getting pretty big. So the more business logic you add, the bigger will be the if statement. And we saw that we have void, and we can kind of have a break. So if we change a little bit the business logic and we say, okay, so if the salary is null, I don't want to execute this code. I just want to return. And maybe in this case, we don't even need the curly braces because it's just one line. And then we remove this one and we remove this one. And as you can see, our code is a bit, in my opinion, easier to read. So we have now, if it's null, it will just return. And as you can see, we'll have the same result. And then if it's not null, it's going to do the business logic. But you may think, well, why do we need this if we already have this one right here? What if we just move this one up? Since we are working with public methods, we do not know the ones that can call, the objects that can call this method. So for example, if I remove this and say, okay, if I execute now, it will work. Actually, it will not work if I don't move this up. So if I execute now, it will work. But the problem is, there is a chance that someone else will call. For example, I still can do this because it's public and we don't know access modifiers yet. And now we will get an exception. So in this case, we need to have in both places. So now we have the exercise fully working. Technically, we should verify as well name and age, but this is just to show you that you have to be careful. Sometimes looks simple, but when you start thinking about the edge cases, things can get complicated and you can keep going on and on until you give up, because there are so many different possibilities and you just have to assume, okay, if he really does that, it's not my problem anymore. So there are specific cases where you, at some point, you just give up and you tell the customer, don't do it. But most of the cases, like 99.9%, you are going to have like a defensive programming style where you get prepared for everything that they may enter or they may do. But of course, it's impossible. The possibilities can, as long as you keep working on the same system, they keep growing exponentially. Okay, so this is everything that I wanted to tell you. I hope you got a pretty good understanding about everything that we spoke so far, because we are going to keep moving on. So see you in the next video. Bye.